She's with me. Single dad spoke calmly. The Millionaire Heiress's walls began to crumble. The crystal chandelier cast diamonds of light across the marble floor. But Serafina Blackwood saw only shadows. Her manicured fingers traced the rim of her champagne flute as she surveyed the charity gala from her perch near the auction stage. A predator studying her territory. 28 years old, worth more than most small countries, and colder than the ice sculptures melting slowly in the corner. Tonight's entertainment? Watching the desperate scramble for her attention, her money, her approval. The annual Children's Foundation Gala always brought out the most pathetic displays of need, and Serafina had perfected the art of crushing hope with surgical precision. But something was different tonight. Something that made her pulse quicken with an unfamiliar sensation she couldn't quite name. A man stood near the silent auction table, his broad shoulders filling out a suit that was clearly borrowed or bought secondhand. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his fingers through it nervously, and there was something about the way he held himself, protective, alert, that drew her attention like a moth to flame. Beside him stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with wild curls barely contained by a simple blue ribbon. Her dress was clean but obviously homemade, the kind of careful stitching that spoke of love rather than luxury. The child's eyes were wide with wonder as she took in the opulent ballroom, completely unaware that she didn't belong. Serafina's lips curved into a smile that would have made sharks nervous. Perfect. Hello, beautiful souls watching from around the world. I hope you're having an incredible day, wherever you are, whether you're curled up at home, taking a break at work, or maybe watching this during your commute. Before we dive into this story that's about to completely change how you see love and protection, I have to ask, have you hit that subscribe button yet? Because trust me, you're going to want to be part of this community. We're building something special here, and I don't want you to miss a single story that could touch your heart. The predator in Serafina awakened as she glided across the marble floor, her Louboutin heels clicking a rhythm of impending destruction. She'd learned long ago that the quickest way to break someone was through their children, their hopes, their dreams, their desperate desire to give their kids a better life. Well, she purred, stopping directly in front of the little girl. The child looked up with innocent brown eyes that held no fear, no recognition of danger. How refreshing. And what do we have here? The man, the father, she assumed, shifted slightly, positioning himself closer to his daughter. Something flickered in his green eyes, a warning that Serafina chose to ignore. I'm Kira, the little girl said brightly, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Daddy brought me to see the pretty dresses and the sparkly lights. Are you a princess? Serafina's laugh was like breaking glass. A princess? Oh, darling, I'm something much more powerful than that. She crouched down to the child's level, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried just far enough for nearby guests to hear. Tell me, little Kira, do you know what this party is for? The child shook her head, curls bouncing. It's for people who can afford to help children like you. People who have money to spare for charity cases. The words dripped with venom disguised as honey. I'm curious, how exactly did you and your father manage to get invitations to an event like this? The question hung in the air like a blade, and Serafina watched with satisfaction as conversations around them began to quiet. Heads turned. Whispers started. This was the moment she lived for, the precise instant when someone realized they were about to be publicly humiliated. But then something unexpected happened. The little girl didn't lower her eyes in shame. She didn't shrink back or start a cry. Instead, she felt her father's hand rest gently on her shoulder, warm and steady and absolutely unshakable. She's with me. 3 words, spoken so quietly they barely disturbed the air, yet they cut through the silence like a sword through silk. Not desperate, not defensive, just certain, unbreakable. The kind of quiet strength that moved mountains and stopped storms. Serafina's breath caught in her throat as she looked up into the man's face. There was no anger there, no embarrassment, no apology. Just an unwavering love that would burn down the world before it let his daughter be diminished. And for the first time in her carefully constructed life, Serafina Blackwood felt something crack inside her chest. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But all Serafina could think about was the way the stranger's voice had reached into places she thought were long dead. The way his protection of his daughter made her suddenly, desperately aware of her own emptiness. Who was this man who could stand in a room full of millionaires and make them all feel small with just 3 words? This is just the beginning of Kira and her father's story, and I have a feeling it's going to completely transform everything you think you know about love, family, and what really matters in life. What do you think is going to happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I love reading your thoughts. The silence stretched like a taut wire, and Serafina found herself studying the man's face with an intensity that surprised her. His name was Ezra. She'd overheard someone mention it earlier, Ezra Thorne. But that was all she knew, and somehow, that made him infinitely more intriguing than any of the men who'd spent fortunes trying to impress her. His green eyes held hers without flinching, and she realized with a start that he wasn't intimidated by her wealth, her reputation, or the circle of curious onlookers that had formed around them. If anything, he seemed disappointed, as if he'd expected better from her. When was the last time someone had looked at her with disappointment instead of fear or desperate hope? "Daddy," Kira whispered, tugging on his jacket sleeve. "Why is the pretty lady being mean?" Ezra's expression softened as he looked down at his daughter, and Serafina watched something extraordinary happen. The hard lines around his eyes melted away, replaced by a tenderness so pure it made her chest ache. This was a man who had learned to be gentle in a world that demanded hardness. "Sometimes, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying the kind of wisdom that came from real struggle. "People say things they don't really mean when they're hurting inside." The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. Hurting inside? How dare he? But even as her mind formed the angry response, her heart whispered a different truth. When was the last time she'd felt anything other than the cold satisfaction of control? When was the last time someone had seen past her armor to the wounded girl beneath? "I'm not hurting," she said, but the words came out weaker than intended. Ezra's gaze returned to hers, and she saw something there that made her want to run. Compassion. Not pity, not judgment, but genuine understanding. Everyone's hurting, Ms. Blackwood. The question is what we choose to do with that pain. How did he know her name? More importantly, how did he manage to say it without the usual reverence or calculation she was accustomed to? He spoke to her like she was just a person, a flawed, complicated person who might be worth knowing. Serafina, she corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. Why had she given him permission to use her first name? "Serafina," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his voice, warm, careful, like he was tasting something precious, made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with champagne. Kira, apparently bored with the adult conversation, had wandered over to examine a nearby ice sculpture of a swan. Her small fingers traced the air around it, careful not to touch, and Serafina found herself watching the child with unexpected fascination. "She's beautiful," Serafina said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. "She's everything," Ezra replied simply, and the absolute certainty in his voice made Serafina's throat tighten. "Her mother died when she was 3. It's been just the 2 of us ever since." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Serafina waited for him to elaborate, to explain how they'd ended up at a charity gala they clearly couldn't afford, to ask for her help or her money or her connections. But he didn't. He just watched his daughter with the kind of love that Serafina had only read about in books. "I'm sorry," she found herself saying, and meant it. "That must have been difficult." "Difficulty doesn't begin to cover it," Ezra said with a rueful smile. "But Kira, she saved me as much as I saved her. Gave me a reason to keep fighting when everything else fell apart. There was a story there. Pain and loss, and the kind of strength that came from having no choice but to be strong." Serafina wanted to know all of it, wanted to understand how someone could lose everything and still radiate the kind of quiet confidence that made her feel small and protected at the same time. "What do you do?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. It was the kind of question people asked at cocktail parties, not in the middle of whatever this moment was becoming. "I'm a carpenter," he said without shame. "I build things, fix things that are broken." His eyes met hers again. Sometimes that includes people. The implication was clear, and Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not broken." "No," he agreed quietly. But you're not whole either. The observation should have made her angry, should have triggered the cold fury that had protected her for so many years. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Before she could respond, Kira came skipping back, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, they have a chocolate fountain. Can we go see it? Please." Ezra glanced at Serafina, and she caught something in his expression, a question, maybe even an invitation. "Would you like to join us, Serafina? I have a feeling Kira would love to show you all the wonders she's discovered tonight." It was such a simple offer, but it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. One step forward, and everything would change. One step back, and she could return to her safe, cold, predictable world. Serafina looked at Kira's hopeful face, at Ezra's patient green eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been frozen for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. And as they walked toward the chocolate fountain together, the billionaire heiress, the single father, and the little girl who somehow made them both better just by existing, Serafina couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down. The question was, would she have the courage to let it fall? I'm absolutely loving how these characters are developing. The chemistry between Serafina and Ezra is already electric, and little Kira is stealing my heart. What do you think? Is Serafina ready to let her walls down, or is she going to fight this connection? Let me know in the comments what you're hoping to see happen next. The chocolate fountain stood like a decadent centerpiece, cascading ribbons of dark sweetness that caught the ballroom's golden light. Kira pressed her nose almost against the glass barrier, her breath fogging the surface as she watched strawberries and marshmallows disappear into the flowing chocolate. "It's like a waterfall made of candy," she whispered in awe, and Serafina found herself smiling, actually smiling for the first time in months. "Would you like to try some?" Serafina asked, reaching for a small plate. "We shouldn't," Ezra said quietly, his hand gently touching Kira's shoulder. "We're not really supposed to be here." The admission hung in the air, and Serafina felt her curiosity sharpen. "What do you mean?" Before Ezra could answer, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Serafina turned to see her assistant, Miranda Ashford, striding across the marble floor with the kind of purposeful anger that meant someone was about to be destroyed. Behind her followed two security guards, their faces grim and professional. "There," Miranda's voice cut through the gentle murmur of conversation like a blade. "That's him, the one who doesn't belong." Serafina's blood turned to ice as she realized Miranda was pointing directly at Ezra. Around them, conversation stopped. Heads turned, the kind of attention that could ruin a person's life in a matter of seconds. "Sir," one of the security guards said, approaching with the measured steps of someone trained to handle problems quietly but efficiently. "We're going to need to see your invitation." Ezra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't move away from Kira. If anything, he seemed to grow taller, more solid, like a tree preparing to weather a storm. "Daddy." Kira's voice was small, confused. She looked up at her father with complete trust, certain he would fix whatever was wrong. "It's okay, sweetheart," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the circle of hostile faces closing around them. "Just stay close to me." "The invitation," the guard repeated, extending his hand. Serafina watched in growing horror as Ezra reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper. Not the elegant cardstock invitation that had been sent to the city's elite, but something that looked like it had been printed on a home computer. "I found it," he said simply, "in the trash behind the hotel where I was working on a renovation project. Someone had thrown it away." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disgust among the watching crowd. Serafina heard the sharp intake of breath from nearby guests, saw the way they stepped back as if poverty might be contagious. "You crashed this event." Miranda's voice dripped with vindictive satisfaction. "Using stolen property." "Not stolen," Ezra corrected, his voice still calm, but with an edge of steel. "Discarded. And I didn't crash anything. I brought my daughter to see something beautiful because she's never had the chance before." "Daddy, what's happening?" Kira's voice was getting smaller, more frightened. She pressed closer to her father's leg, and Serafina saw the exact moment the little girl realized that the pretty party wasn't as magical as she'd thought. This is exactly the kind of security breach we've been worried about, Miranda continued, clearly enjoying her moment of power. Who knows what his real intentions are? He could be anyone. A thief, a con artist, someone dangerous. He's not dangerous, Serafina heard herself say, the words escaping before she could stop them. Every eye in the circle turned to her, and she felt the weight of their surprise. Miranda's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Ms. Blackwood, surely you can't be defending this trespasser? Serafina looked at Ezra, saw the way he was trying to shield Kira from the hostile stares, the way his shoulders had set in preparation for whatever humiliation was coming. She thought about his words earlier, about people saying things they didn't mean when they were hurting inside. She thought about the way he'd said, "She's with me," with such quiet strength. She thought about the last time anyone had looked at her and seen something worth protecting. "I invited him," she said, the lie rolling off her tongue with surprising ease. The silence that followed was deafening. Miranda's mouth fell open. The security guards looked confused. Even Ezra stared at her with something that might have been shock. "You what?" Miranda stammered. "I said I invited him." Serafina stepped closer to Ezra and Kira, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Mr. Thorne is my guest, as is his daughter." "But Ms. Blackwood," one of the guards said carefully, "his invitation was a backup copy," Serafina interrupted smoothly. "I had Miranda send the original to his work address, but there was some confusion with the delivery. Isn't that right, Miranda?" Her assistant's face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling on a dangerous purple. "Ms. Blackwood, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Serafina said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from owning half the city, "is why my guests are being harassed by security when they should be enjoying the evening I planned for them." The crowd began to disperse, sensing that the drama was over and they were no longer welcome to watch. The security guards retreated with mumbled apologies. But Miranda remained, her eyes blazing with fury and something that looked like betrayal. "We need to talk," she hissed. "Privately." "Later," Serafina said dismissively. "Right now, I'm with my guests." As Miranda stalked away, Serafina became acutely aware that she was now alone with Ezra and Kira, having just publicly claimed them as her responsibility. The magnitude of what she'd done began to sink in. "What?" Ezra asked quietly, his green eyes searching her face. Serafina looked down at Kira, who was still pressed against her father's side, but was now looking up at her with something like wonder. "You saved us," the little girl whispered, "like a real princess." And in that moment, standing in a ballroom full of people who would sell their souls for her approval, Serafina realized that this 7-year-old girl and her carpenter father had just given her something she'd never had before. A chance to be the hero instead of the villain. "Because," she said, meeting Ezra's gaze, "she's with you. And now, you're both with me." The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility and the terrifying prospect of change. Serafina had just burned a bridge she couldn't rebuild, made a choice she couldn't take back. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision she'd ever made. "Oh my goodness, did you see that coming?" Serafina just completely changed the game. "I'm getting chills thinking about what this means for all three of them." What do you think motivated her to take such a huge risk? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I have a feeling this story is about to get even more intense. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of stolen glances and careful conversations. Serafina found herself genuinely laughing for the first time in years as Kira provided running commentary on everything from the fancy fish eggs, caviar, to the dancing ladies with sparkly dresses. But beneath this surface magic, she could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation following them around the ballroom. "The ice cream has gold on it," Kira exclaimed, pointing at the dessert station with wide eyes. "Is it real gold? Can you eat gold? What does it taste like?" "It's edible gold leaf," Serafina explained, finding herself oddly charmed by the child's endless questions. "It doesn't really taste like anything, but it makes everything look more special. Like fairy dust." Kira nodded sagely, then looked up at her father. "Daddy, can we put gold on our pancakes at home?" Ezra's smile was gentle, but tinged with something that might have been sadness. "I think regular syrup will have to do, sweetheart. The casual reminder of their different worlds hit Serafina unexpectedly hard. While she casually spent more on a single dress than most people made in a year, this man was probably calculating whether he could afford the gas to drive home tonight. "Would you like to see the garden?" she found herself asking. "It's beautiful at night, and much quieter than in here." Ezra hesitated, glancing around the ballroom where Miranda was holding court near the auction table, her eyes shooting daggers in their direction every few minutes. "Are you sure it's wise?" he asked quietly. "I get the feeling your assistant isn't thrilled with your charitable impulse tonight." "Miranda works for me, not the other way around," Serafina said. But even as the words left her mouth, she wondered if that was entirely true anymore. When had she started letting other people make decisions about her life? The garden was indeed beautiful, strung with thousands of tiny lights that turned the space into something magical. Kira immediately ran toward a fountain where koi fish swam in lazy circles, her delighted laughter echoing off the stone walls. "She's never seen fish like that before," Ezra said, watching his daughter with the kind of attention that spoke of years spent being her entire world. "We don't exactly frequent places with ornamental ponds." "Where do you live?" Serafina asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. Of course he didn't live in the kind of neighborhood where she might have encountered him before. "Riverside District," he said without shame. "Small apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. Kira loves it because she can smell fresh bread every morning, and Mrs. Chen spoils her with day-old pastries." Serafina tried to picture it. The narrow streets, the cramped spaces, the constant worry about money that she'd never had to experience. It should have felt foreign, maybe even distasteful. Instead, it sounded warm, real. "What about you?" Ezra asked, settling onto a stone bench where he could keep an eye on Kira. "Where does someone like you call home?" "I have several houses," Serafina said automatically, then caught herself. I live in the penthouse downtown, 42nd floor. You can see the whole city from the windows." "Sounds lonely," he said quietly. The observation hit her like a physical blow. "It's not lonely. It's peaceful. Is there a difference?" Before she could answer, Kira came running back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "The fish are so pretty. And there's a turtle, a real live turtle." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Ezra said, pulling her onto his lap. "But we should probably head home soon. It's getting late, and you have school tomorrow." "Do we have to?" Kira's face fell. "This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. Can't we stay just a little longer?" Serafina watched the internal struggle play out on Ezra's face, the desire to give his daughter everything she wanted while warring with the practical realities of their life. It was a kind of love she'd never witnessed before, complicated and selfless and absolutely devastating. "Actually," she heard herself say, "I was wondering if you'd both like to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Somewhere special." The words hung in the air between them, and Serafina realized she'd just crossed another line she couldn't uncross. This wasn't charity anymore, wasn't a momentary impulse. This was something else entirely. "Serafina," Ezra said carefully, "I appreciate what you did tonight, but—" "But what?" she challenged, surprised by the defensiveness in her own voice. "But we live in different worlds," he said gently, "and I won't let Kira get attached to something that can't last." The words stung more than they should have. "How do you know it can't last?" "Because people like you don't really see people like us," he said, not unkindly but with the weight of experience behind it. "We're projects, charity cases, ways to feel good about yourselves. But when the novelty wears off—" "That's not what this is," Serafina protested. But even as she said it, she wondered if he was right. Was this just another way for her to feel superior? Another game to play? "Isn't it?" Ezra stood, lifting Kira in his arms. "You saved us tonight, and I'm grateful. But I won't let my daughter become your pet cause." The accusation hit her like a slap, partly because it was exactly what she'd been thinking earlier, and partly because somewhere between the chocolate fountain and the garden, her motivations had shifted into something she didn't quite understand. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "I know enough," he replied, but his eyes were sad rather than angry. "I know you're used to getting what you want. I know you're not used to people saying no to you. And I know that whatever this is, it's not real." "How can you say that?" The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Ezra paused at the garden entrance, Kira drowsy in his arms. Because real life doesn't happen at charity galas, Serafina. It really happens at 3 in the morning when your kid has a fever and you can't afford the doctor. Real happens when you're choosing between groceries and rent. It really happens in small apartments above bakeries, not in penthouses with city views. He was walking away, taking his daughter and his quiet strength and his devastating honesty with him. Serafina stood frozen in the garden, surrounded by fairy lights and the scent of expensive flowers, feeling more alone than she had in years. "Ezra, wait," she called out, but he was already disappearing into the ballroom. She followed, her heels clicking urgently on the marble floor, but by the time she reached the main entrance, they were gone, vanished into the night like something from a fairy tale, leaving her standing in a room full of people who knew her name, but not her heart. "There you are." Miranda's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "We need to talk. Now." Serafina turned to face her assistant, seeing for the first time the calculation in those cold blue eyes. The way Miranda looked at her like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. "Not now, Miranda." "Yes, now," Miranda insisted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've done tonight? The questions people are asking? The rumors that are already starting?" "I don't care about rumors." "Well, you should," Miranda snapped. "Because your reputation is everything in this world, and you just threw it away for some random man and his brat." The words hit Serafina like a physical blow, and she felt something cold and furious unfurl in her chest. "Don't you ever call her that again." "Call her what? What is she?" Miranda's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Wake up, Serafina. He played you. Probably planned the whole thing. The sad story, the cute kid, the noble poverty act. And you fell for it like some naive little girl." "You're wrong," Serafina said, but doubt was already creeping in. Was she wrong? Had she been played? "Am I?" Miranda pulled out her phone, scrolling through something with vindictive satisfaction. "Because I did some digging while you were playing fairy godmother. Your carpenter prince? He's got quite the history." Serafina's blood turned to ice. "What kind of history?" Miranda's smile was sharp as a knife. "The kind that's going to destroy everything you've built if you don't cut ties with him right now." "Oh no." Just when things were getting beautiful between them, Miranda drops this bombshell. "What do you think she found out about Ezra? Is it real, or is she manipulating Serafina?" "I'm literally on the edge of my seat, and I know you are too. Tell me in the comments what you think Miranda discovered. I love hearing your theories." Miranda's phone screen glowed like a weapon in the dim ballroom lighting. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs as her assistant scrolled through what looked like newspaper articles, police reports, official documents that could destroy a person's life with a few carefully chosen words. "Ezra Thorne," Miranda began, her voice dripping with vindictive satisfaction. "Arrested 3 years ago for assault. Spent 6 months in county jail. Lost his construction business, his house, everything." The words hit Serafina like physical blows. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Miranda turned the phone screen toward her, and Serafina saw a mugshot. Ezra's face, younger and harder, staring back at her with hollow eyes. He attacked his business partner during a dispute over money. Put the man in the hospital. Serafina stared at the image, trying to reconcile the gentle father she'd spent the evening with and the angry stranger in the photograph. There has to be more to the story. There always is, isn't there? Miranda's laugh was cold. There's always some sob story, some excuse. But the facts are the facts, Serafina. He's violent, he's desperate, and now he's got his hooks in you. "You don't know what you're talking about," Serafina said, but her voice lacked conviction. The doubt was spreading through her chest like poison, making it hard to breathe. "Don't I?" Miranda leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Think about it. A man like that, with a child to support, suddenly finds himself at a charity gala full of wealthy, naive women. You think it's a coincidence that he targeted you specifically?" "He didn't target me. I approached him. After he positioned himself and his daughter exactly where you'd see them," Miranda countered smoothly. "After he made sure you'd notice how out of place they were, how vulnerable the little girl looked. It's textbook manipulation, Serafina." The words were like acid, eating away at the magical evening she'd just experienced. Had Ezra been playing her? Had every gentle word, every protective gesture been calculated to make her feel exactly what she'd felt? I need to see the rest of the file, Serafina said, her voice barely above a whisper. Miranda's smile was triumphant. I thought you might. They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the remaining guests who were still mingling and bidding on auction items. Miranda pulled up article after article, each one painting a picture of a man who'd lost everything and might do anything to get it back. The assault charge was just the beginning, Miranda continued, scrolling through the documents. After he got out of jail, he couldn't find steady work. Evicted from 3 different apartments. His daughter was almost taken by social services twice. Serafina's stomach churned. Almost taken. Neglect charges. Nothing that stuck, but enough to show a pattern. A man who can't provide for his child, who's willing to crash exclusive events to get close to wealthy women. Miranda let the implication hang in the air. Stop, Serafina whispered, but she couldn't look away from the screen. There's more, Miranda said relentlessly. Guess who was working on renovations at the Grandview Hotel last month? The same hotel where tonight's invitations were being printed. The final piece clicked into place with devastating clarity. Ezra hadn't found a discarded invitation in the trash. He'd stolen it. Planned this entire encounter. Used his daughter as bait to hook the richest woman in the room. Serafina felt something die inside her chest. Something fragile and hopeful that she'd barely had time to recognize before it was crushed. I want him investigated, she said, her voice flat and cold. Full background check. Financial records. Everything. Already in progress, Miranda said with satisfaction. I'll have a complete report by morning. And I want security footage from the hotel. I want to know exactly how he got that invitation. Consider it done. Serafina stared out at the ballroom, seeing it now through different eyes. The fairy tale was over. The magic had been nothing but smoke and mirrors, performed by a desperate man who'd seen her coming from a mile away. But even as the logical part of her mind accepted the evidence, something deeper rebelled. The way Ezra had looked at his daughter, the genuine love in his voice when he spoke about her, that couldn't have been fake. Could it? There's something else, Miranda said, her voice softer now, almost gentle. Something you need to know about why he targeted you specifically. Serafina's blood turned to ice. What? Your father's construction company. The one that went under 5 years ago, taking dozens of smaller contractors with it. The mention of her father sent a chill down Serafina's spine. Richard Blackwood had been many things. Brilliant, ruthless, utterly without conscience when it came to business. His empire had been built on the ruins of smaller companies, and when it finally collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, it had taken half the city's construction industry with it. What about it? Ezra Thorne's company was one of the ones that got destroyed in the fallout. He lost everything because of your father's illegal practices. His business, his house, his wife's medical bills that he couldn't pay after the insurance company dropped them. The words hit Serafina like a physical blow. His wife died because of my father. Cancer, Miranda said quietly. She needed experimental treatment that wasn't covered by insurance. Treatment they could have afforded if your father hadn't destroyed their business and stolen their contracts. Serafina felt the world tilt around her. Everything made horrible, perfect sense now. Ezra hadn't just been looking for a wealthy mark. He'd been looking for her specifically, the daughter of the man who'd killed his wife. He's been planning this for years, she whispered. Probably, Miranda agreed, waiting for the perfect opportunity to get close to you, to make you care about him and his daughter before he destroyed you the way your father destroyed him. Serafina closed her eyes, remembering the way Ezra had looked at her in the garden. The sadness in his voice when he'd said they lived in different worlds. Had that guilt, regret for what he was planning to do to her. What do you want me to do? Miranda asked. Serafina opened her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was as cold as winter. I want you to destroy him. Completely. I want him to lose his job, his apartment, everything. I want him to understand what it feels like to have his world torn apart by someone with more power. And the child. For a moment, Serafina hesitated. Kira's innocent face flashed through her mind, the wonder in her eyes, the way she'd called her a princess. But then she remembered that it had all been part of the plan. Even the child had been a weapon used against her. The child is his responsibility, she said finally. If he cared about her welfare, he shouldn't have used her in his scheme. Miranda nodded, already pulling out her phone to make calls. It'll be done by morning. As her assistant walked away to begin the destruction of Ezra Thorne's life, Seraphina stood alone in the ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of what had briefly felt like magic. The fairy lights seemed dimmer now, the music hollow, the laughter of the remaining guests sharp and false. She'd been playing, manipulated by a master who'd used her own loneliness against her, who'd made her believe, for just a few precious hours, that someone might see her as more than just a bank account with legs. But as she stood there, something nagged at her. Something about the way Ezra had tried to leave, the way he'd warned her that their worlds were too different. If he'd been planning to destroy her, why'd he try to walk away? The doubt was a splinter in her mind, small but sharp. But it was too late now. The wheels were already in motion, and by morning, Ezra Thorne would learn what it meant to cross a Blackwood. Even if it destroyed the first real connection she'd felt in years. Even if it meant becoming exactly the kind of person her father had been. Even if it meant losing the only chance she might ever have at something real. My heart is absolutely breaking right now. The revelation about Seraphina's father changes everything. But is Miranda telling the whole truth? Something feels off about this whole situation. What do you think? Is Ezra really the villain here? Or is there more to this story? I have a feeling we're about to discover that nothing is what it seems. Share your thoughts below. The morning sun felt like an accusation streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Seraphina's penthouse. She stood in her silk robe, coffee growing cold in her hands, staring down at the city 42 floors below. Somewhere down there, Ezra Thorne was probably waking up in his small apartment above the bakery, completely unaware that his world was about to end. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "It's done. Check the news." Seraphina's fingers trembled as she opened her tablet. The headline hit her like a physical blow. Local contractor exposed. Criminal past. Welfare fraud. Child endangerment. The article was devastating in its thoroughness. Every mistake Ezra had ever made, every desperate choice, every moment of weakness, all laid bare for the world to see. The mugshot from 3 years ago dominated the screen, making him look dangerous, unhinged. But it was the smaller details that made Seraphina's stomach churn. The article mentioned his current address, his daughter's school, even the bakery where they lived. By noon, reporters would be swarming the neighborhood. By evening, they'd have nowhere to hide. Her phone rang. Miranda's voice was crisp with satisfaction. "The construction company fired him an hour ago. The landlord is starting eviction proceedings. And I've made sure every contractor in the city knows not to hire him." "Good," Seraphina said, but the word tasted like ash in her mouth. "There's more." Child Protective Services received an anonymous tip about unsafe living conditions. They're conducting a welfare check this afternoon. Seraphina's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "You called CPS? You said you wanted him destroyed completely," Miranda reminded her. "This is what complete destruction looks like." The image of Kira's trusting face flashed through Seraphina's mind. The little girl who'd called her a princess, who'd been so excited about the chocolate fountain and the golden fish. The child who might be taken from her father because of a phone call Seraphina had authorized. "I need to," she started, then stopped. "What I need to do? Take it back. Undo what she'd set in motion. It was too late for that. You need to stay strong," Miranda said firmly. "This is justice, Seraphina. He used his daughter to manipulate you, and now he's facing the consequences." But even as Miranda spoke, doubt gnawed at Seraphina's chest. She kept remembering the way Ezra had tried to leave the gala, the way he'd warned her that their worlds were too different. If he'd been planning to destroy her, why'd he try to walk away? "I want to see the complete file," she said suddenly. "Everything you found on him. Seraphina, you don't need to torture yourself. I want to see it. Now." An hour later, Miranda arrived with a thick folder that contained the complete destruction of a man's life. Seraphina spread the documents across her dining table, studying each piece of evidence that had condemned Ezra Thorne. The assault charge was real, but as she read deeper, the story became more complicated. Ezra had attacked his business partner, yes, but only after discovering that the man had been embezzling money meant for worker salaries, money that families needed to survive. The victim had been stealing from dozens of employees, and when Ezra confronted him, the confrontation had turned physical. The neglect charges were real too, but they'd been filed by a vindictive neighbor who'd been angry about noise complaints. Every investigation had found Kira healthy, happy, and well cared for. The charges had been dropped, but the stain remained on his record, and the connection to her father's company. Serafina's hands shook as she read the details. Ezra's construction business had indeed been destroyed in the fallout from Richard Blackwood's empire, but not because of anything illegal. They'd simply been too small to survive when the larger contracts disappeared. But it was the medical records that broke her heart completely. Ezra's wife, Elena, had died of cancer, but not because they couldn't afford treatment. She died because the cancer had been too aggressive, too advanced by the time it was discovered. The experimental treatments had been a desperate last hope, not a realistic option. Ezra had never blamed anyone for his wife's death. He'd simply grieved, struggled, and tried to rebuild his life for his daughter's sake. "This isn't what you told me," Serafina whispered, looking up at Miranda with growing horror. Her assistant's face was carefully neutral. "I told you the facts. You told me lies." Serafina's voice cracked. "You made it sound like he was some kind of predator, like he planned this whole thing to hurt me. Didn't he?" Miranda's mask slipped slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "He crashed an exclusive event using a stolen invitation. He approached you specifically. He used his daughter to gain your sympathy. He found a discarded invitation and wanted to show his daughter something beautiful," Serafina said, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. "And I approached him, not the other way around." "You're being naive." "No." Serafina stood, her voice growing stronger. "I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly." She thought about the way Ezra had looked at her in the garden, the sadness in his eyes when he'd said their worlds were too different. He hadn't been planning to hurt her. He'd been protecting himself and his daughter from exactly what was happening now. "Call it off," she said suddenly. "All of it. The reporters, the eviction, the CPS investigation. Call it off right now." Miranda's face hardened. "It's too late for that. The story's already out there. The damage is done. Then fix it. Retract the story. Pay off the landlord. Make it go away." "I won't do that." The words hung in the air between them, and Serafina felt something shift in the room. Something dangerous and final. "Excuse me. I said I won't do that," Miranda repeated, her voice steady. "You're making a mistake, Serafina. A mistake that could destroy everything we've built." "We?" Serafina's voice was deadly quiet. "What exactly have we built, Miranda?" "Your reputation, your empire, your power." Miranda stepped closer, her eyes blazing with something that looked almost like ownership. "Do you think any of this happened by accident? Do you think you became the most feared woman in the city because of your charming personality?" The truth hit Serafina like a sledgehammer. "You've been manipulating me." "I've been protecting you," Miranda corrected. "From your own weakness. From your tendency to let emotions cloud your judgment. From people who would use your loneliness against you. Like Ezra. Exactly like Ezra." Miranda's smile was sharp as a blade. "You were ready to throw away everything for a man you'd known for 3 hours. A man with a criminal record and a sob story. If that's not weakness, what is?" Serafina stared at the woman she'd trusted for 5 years, seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're fired." Miranda laughed, the sound cold and ugly. "You can't fire me, Serafina. I know too much. About your father's real business practices. About the bribes, the blackmail, the people who disappeared when they got too close to the truth. About all the things you've done to maintain your precious empire. You never asked questions," Miranda finished. "You never wanted to know how the sausage was made. You just enjoyed the power and let me handle the dirty work. But now you want to play innocent? Now you want to pretend you're some kind of saint." The words were like poison, seeping into every corner of Serafina's carefully constructed world. How much of her life had been built on lies? How many people had been destroyed to maintain her position? "But here's the thing," Miranda continued, pulling out her phone. "I have insurance. Photos, documents, recordings of every conversation we've ever had about eliminating threats to your business. If you try to destroy me, I'll take you down with me." Serafina felt the walls closing in around her. She was trapped by her own choices, by her willingness to let someone else make the hard decisions, by years of willful blindness to the cost of her power. "So here's what's going to happen," Miranda said with cold satisfaction. "You're going to forget about Ezra Thorne and his daughter. You're going to let this play out exactly as planned. and you're going to remember who really runs your life. As Miranda walked toward the door, Serafina stood frozen in her penthouse prison, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt like chains. Somewhere across the city, a little girl was probably crying as strangers invaded her home, asking questions about her father that she was too young to understand. And it was all Serafina's fault. She thought she was protecting herself from a con man, but she'd been the one being conned all along. Not by Ezra, but by the woman she trusted most. Now Ezra and Kira were paying the price for her blindness, and she had no idea how to save them, or if it was already too late. I am absolutely devastated. Miranda has been the real villain this whole time, and now Serafina realizes she's been a puppet in her own life. But there's still hope. There has to be. What do you think Serafina should do? How can she possibly fix this mess? Let me know in the comments because I need to know you're as invested in this as I am. Serafina stood in her penthouse for exactly 3 minutes after Miranda left, staring at the shattered coffee cup on the marble floor. 3 minutes of paralysis, of feeling the weight of her gilded cage pressing down on her shoulders. Then something inside her snapped. Not broke, but snapped in a place like a bone setting after a fracture. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. Blackwood Industries Legal Department. This is Serafina Blackwood. I need to speak to David Chun immediately. Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Chun, is in a meeting. Then get him out of it. Now. 5 minutes later, her father's former head of legal was on the line, his voice carefully neutral. Ms. Blackwood, it's been a long time. David, I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Miranda Ashford, how much power does she actually have over my assets? A long pause. That's a complicated question. Uncomplicated. She has significant access to your accounts, your business dealings, power of attorney in many situations. But Ms. Blackwood, why are you asking? Has something happened? Serafina closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of her own stupidity. She's been making decisions in my name, hasn't she? For years. I assumed you knew. The contracts she's negotiated, the people she's had removed from projects, the NDAs she's enforced, all of it has been done with your apparent approval. What people removed from projects? Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Blackwood, perhaps we should meet in person. Tell me now, David. What's she done in my name? The list was devastating. Contractors blacklisted for refusing to pay kickbacks. Journalists silenced for asking too many questions about her father's business practices. Families evicted from properties to make way for more profitable developments. All of it done with Serafina's signature, her authority, her money. How is this possible? She whispered. How did I not know? You trusted her, David said gently. And she's very good at what she does. But Ms. Blackwood, if you're having doubts about Ms. Ashford's methods, you should know that several of us have been concerned for some time. Concerned about what? About the extent of her control, about some of the decisions being made, about the fact that she seems to have more access to your father's old files than even you do. Serafina's blood turned to ice. What files? The ones from before the company collapsed. The real records of what your father was involved in. Ms. Ashford has been using them as leverage for years, ensuring that certain people stay quiet about certain things. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than Serafina had imagined. Miranda hadn't just been her assistant. She'd been running a shadow empire using Serafina's name and resources, built on the foundation of her father's crimes. David, I need you to do something for me. Right now. Of course. I need you to freeze Miranda's access to all my accounts. Every single one. And I need you to prepare termination papers. Not just employment termination, but complete severance of any legal authority she has over my affairs. Ms. Blackwood, that's going to be complicated. She has contracts, agreements. I don't care if you have to burn down half the legal system to do it. I want her cut off from my life completely. Can you do that? It'll take time, but yes, it can be done. How much time? Give me 6 hours. Serafina looked at the clock. It was barely noon. Do it. And David, I need one more thing. I need you to find out everything you can about a man named Ezra Thorne. Not the lies that have been spread about him today, but the truth. The real truth. After she hung up, Serafina stood in her penthouse and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, clarity. For the first time since her father's death, She could see her life without the filter of Miranda's manipulation. And what she saw made her sick, but it also made her angry. And anger, she was discovering, was a much more useful emotion than despair. She changed into jeans and a simple sweater, clothes she hadn't worn in years, and headed for the elevator. She had no idea what she was going to say to Ezra, no plan beyond the desperate need to see him and his daughter with her own eyes. The Riverside district was exactly as Ezra had described it. Narrow streets lined with small shops and older buildings. The kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's names and looked out for each other's children. It should have felt foreign to someone who'd spent her life in penthouses and boardrooms, but instead it felt real. She found the bakery easily enough. Mrs. Chin's bakery, with its cheerful yellow awning and windows full of fresh bread. But the scene outside made her heart sink. News vans lined the street. Reporters with cameras and microphones clustered around the building's entrance. And parked directly in front was a white sedan with government plates, Child Protective Services. Serafina pushed through the crowd of reporters, ignoring their shouted questions, and made her way to the narrow staircase that led to the apartments above the bakery. A social worker was coming down the stairs, her face grim. "Excuse me," Serafina called out. "I need to speak with you about the Thorne family." The woman turned, her expression professional but tired. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss an ongoing investigation. My name is Serafina Blackwood. I'm the one who—" She stopped, the words sticking in her throat. "I'm the reason you're here." The social worker's eyebrows rose. "Ms. Blackwood, you're the one who called in the complaint." "No, but I'm the one responsible for it." Serafina took a deep breath. "And I need to know, is the little girl okay?" Something in her voice must have conveyed her genuine concern, because the social worker's expression softened slightly. "The child is fine. Healthy, well cared for, clearly loved. The living conditions are modest, but clean and safe." Relief flooded through Serafina's chest. "And her father?" "I'm devastated," the social worker said bluntly. "He's lost his job, he's facing eviction, and now he's terrified that his daughter is going to be taken away from him. All because of a complaint that appears to have been completely fabricated." The words hit Serafina like physical blows. Fabricated. There's no evidence of neglect or abuse. None. This appears to be a malicious report designed to harass a single father who's already struggling. The social worker studied Serafina's face. "You said you were responsible. What did you mean by that?" Before Serafina could answer, she heard a small voice from the top of the stairs. "Daddy, who are all these people? Why are they taking pictures of our house?" Serafina looked up to see Kira peering down through the stair railings, her face confused and frightened. Behind her, Ezra appeared, and when his eyes met Serafina's, the pain in them nearly brought her to her knees. "You," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of betrayal that cut deeper than any scream could have. "You did this. Ezra, you destroyed us," he continued, his voice still calm, but filled with a devastation that made her want to disappear. "My daughter is terrified. She doesn't understand why strangers are asking her questions about whether Daddy takes care of her. She doesn't understand why her friends at school are going to see her father's picture in the newspaper next to words like criminal and dangerous." "I can fix this," Serafina said desperately. "I can make it right." "Can you?" Ezra's laugh was hollow. "Can you give me back my job? Can you erase the story from the internet? Can you take back the fear in my daughter's eyes?" Serafina felt tears burning behind her eyes, tears she hadn't shed in years. "I was lied to, manipulated. I thought you were trying to hurt me. So you decided to hurt me first." Ezra shook his head. "You know what the worst part is? I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between us. Something worth fighting for." "There was," Serafina whispered. "There is." "No," Ezra said firmly. "There isn't. Because reality doesn't destroy people at the first sign of doubt. Real doesn't use children as collateral damage. Real doesn't happen between people who live in worlds this far apart." He turned to go back upstairs, but Serafina called out desperately, "Ezra, wait. Please, give me a chance to make this right." He paused, looking back at her with eyes that held no hope, only exhaustion. "You want to make it right? Leave us alone. Let us try to rebuild what you've destroyed. And next time you meet someone who makes you feel something real, maybe try trusting them instead of destroying them." As he disappeared up the stairs with Kira, Serafina stood in the narrow hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of what might have been the most important relationship of her life. The social worker was watching her with something that might have been pity. "Is there anything you can do?" Serafina asked quietly. "To help them. I can close the case immediately," the woman said. "Make it clear that the complaint was unfounded. But the damage to his reputation, his employment situation, that's beyond my power to fix." Serafina nodded, understanding. The social worker left, and slowly the reporters began to disperse, sensing that the story was over. But Serafina remained, staring up at the stairs that led to a small apartment where a little girl was probably asking her father why the pretty lady from the party had hurt them. She pulled out her phone and called David Chun. "David, it's me. How's the progress on cutting Miranda's access?" "Almost done. But Serafina, there's something else you need to know. I've been digging into the Ezra Thorne situation, and—" "I know," she interrupted. "I know it was all lies. The question is, can we fix it?" "Fix it how?" Serafina looked up at the windows of the apartment above, where warm light glowed against the gathering dusk. Somewhere up there, a father was probably holding his daughter and trying to explain why their world had suddenly become so cruel. "I want you to buy the building," she said suddenly. "Which building?" "This one. The bakery and the apartments above it. I want to buy it and make sure Ezra and Kira can never be evicted. And I want you to find out who owns the construction company that fired him. I want to buy that too." "Serafina, that's going to raise questions." "Let it raise questions. I'm done hiding behind other people's decisions. I'm done letting fear make my choices for me." She took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside her chest. "It's time I started fighting for something that matters." As she walked back toward her car, Serafina felt the weight of her old life falling away like a discarded coat. She didn't know if Ezra would ever forgive her, didn't know if she could truly make amends for the pain she'd caused. But for the first time in years, she knew exactly who she wanted to be, and she was going to fight like hell to become that person. Yes, finally, Serafina is taking control of her own life. But will it be enough to win back Ezra's trust? Can she really undo all the damage that's been done? I'm so proud of her for finally standing up to Miranda, but the real test is just beginning. What do you think? Is there still hope for these three to become a family? Tell me in the comments. 3 weeks later, Serafina sat in her car outside Kira's elementary school, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd been coming here every day for a week, watching from a distance as Ezra picked up his daughter, never approaching but unable to stay away. The legal battles with Miranda had been swift and brutal. David Chun had worked miracles, freezing her access to Serafina's accounts and uncovering a web of corruption that went back years. Miranda was now facing federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and extortion. The empire she'd built using Serafina's name was crumbling, taking with it dozens of people who'd profited from the misery of others. But none of that mattered if she couldn't fix what she'd broken. The school bell rang, and children began streaming out of the building. Serafina spotted Kira immediately. Her wild curls were unmistakable, even from a distance. But something was wrong. The little girl who'd been so full of wonder and joy at the gala now walked with her shoulders hunched, her eyes downcast. She looked diminished. Ezra appeared a moment later, and Serafina's heart clenched at the sight of him. He looked exhausted, older somehow, as if the weight of the past few weeks had aged him years. When Kira reached him, he knelt down and pulled her into a hug that spoke of desperate love and barely contained fear. Serafina was so focused on watching them that she almost missed the group of older boys approaching. Almost. "Hey, it's the criminal's kid," one of them called out, loud enough for half the schoolyard to hear. Kira's shoulders tensed, and she pressed closer to her father. "My mom says your dad's a bad man," another boy added. "She says you're probably bad too." That was enough. Serafina was out of her car and striding across the schoolyard before she'd consciously decided to move. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made the boys take an automatic step back. "Is there a problem here?" The ringleader, a boy of maybe 10 with the kind of entitled smirk that reminded her uncomfortably of her younger self, looked her up and down. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who doesn't tolerate bullies," Serafina said calmly. "And I'm someone who knows that children who pick on other children usually learn that behavior from adults who should know better." She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the boy. "What's your name?" "You can't take my picture," the boy protested, but his bravado was cracking. "Actually, I can. And I'm going to send it to my friend who works at the school district, along with a detailed report about what I just witnessed. I'm also going to have a conversation with your parents about the kind of values they're teaching you." The boys scattered like leaves in the wind, leaving Serafina standing alone with Ezra and Kira. The little girl was staring up at her with wide eyes, and Serafina felt her heart break all over again at the wariness she saw there. "You came," Kira said quietly. "I've been coming every day," Serafina admitted, then looked at Ezra. "I know you don't want to see me. I know you have every right to hate me. But I couldn't stand by and watch her be hurt because of what I did." Ezra's jaw was tight, his green eyes unreadable. "What do you want, Serafina?" "I want to tell you the truth. All of it. And then I want to try to make things right." "The truth?" Ezra's laugh was bitter. "I think I've had enough of your version of the truth." "Not my version," Serafina said quietly. "The real truth. About Miranda. About what she did. About how she manipulated both of us." Something flickered in Ezra's eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. "What are you talking about?" Serafina pulled out a thick folder from her car. "Miranda Ashford has been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. She's been using my name and resources to run a criminal enterprise for years. The story about you, the investigation, the CPS call, all of it was her doing, using information she'd twisted and lies she'd fabricated." Ezra took the folder with shaking hands, scanning the documents inside. Serafina watched his face change as he read, confusion giving way to understanding, then to an anger so pure it made her step back. "She destroyed my reputation to protect her own power," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Yes, and I let her do it because I was too much of a coward to think for myself." Serafina's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Ezra. I'm sorry I didn't trust what I felt when I was with you. I'm sorry I let fear make me into someone I hate. And I'm sorry that Kira had to pay the price for my weakness." Kira had been listening to the adult conversation with the kind of intense focus that children brought to things they didn't quite understand but knew were important. "Does this mean Daddy's not in trouble anymore?" she asked. Serafina knelt down to Kira's level, her heart hammering. "Your daddy was never really in trouble, sweetheart. Some very bad people told lies about him, and I believed those lies instead of believing what I knew in my heart, that your daddy is one of the best men I've ever met. Are you going to make the lies go away?" "I'm trying," Serafina said honestly. "I've hired people to tell everyone the truth about what really happened. And I've done some other things too, things I hope will help." She stood and looked at Ezra. "I bought the construction company that fired you. You're the new head of operations, if you want the job. I also bought your building, and I've had the eviction notice withdrawn. Mrs. Chen sends her regards, by the way. Apparently she's been giving Miranda's lawyers hell for the past 3 weeks." Ezra stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You bought a construction company?" "I bought 3 construction companies," Serafina corrected. "And I'm planning to use them to build affordable housing throughout the city. Real affordable housing, not the kind that gets gentrified out of existence in 5 years." "What?" The simple question hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they'd been through, everything they'd lost, everything they might still have. "Because you were right," Serafina said quietly. "About real. About what matters. About the fact that I've been living in a tower made of other people's pain." She took a shaky breath. "Because for 3 hours at a charity gala, you and your daughter showed me what it felt like to be human again. And because I love you." The words hung in the air like a prayer, like a confession, like a leap of faith off the edge of a cliff. "Both of you," she continued, looking down at Kira. "I love the way you see magic in chocolate fountains and golden fish. I love the way you trust people to be good, even when they've given you no reason to. And I love the way your father would burn down the world to protect you." She looked back at Ezra, her heart in her throat. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I broke something that might not be fixable. But I had to try. I had to fight for the most real thing that's ever happened to me." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read her soul. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "The night of the gala, when I told you that nothing really happened at charity events, I was wrong." Serafina's breath caught. "Real happened the moment you stood up for us," he continued. "Real happened when you chose to protect Kira instead of protecting yourself. And it really happened again just now, when you came to defend her from those boys. He stepped closer, and Serafina could see the tears in his eyes. I've been angry for 3 weeks, he said. Angry and hurt and convinced that I've been played by someone who saw me as entertainment. But then I started getting calls from reporters who wanted to interview me about Miranda's arrest. I started learning about all the things you'd done to try to make this right. Ezra, let me finish, he said gently. I realized that the woman who destroyed my life and the woman who's been fighting to rebuild it, they're not the same person. One of them was a puppet. The other one is the woman I fell in love with at a chocolate fountain. Serafina felt tears streaming down her face. You fell in love with me. The moment you asked Kira if she wanted to try some chocolate, he said with a smile that made her heart soar. The moment you looked at my daughter like she was precious instead of pitiful. The moment you chose to be kind when you could have been cruel. Kira, who had been watching this exchange with the kind of intense focus that suggested she understood more than the adults realized, suddenly spoke up. Does this mean Serafina can come have pancakes with us? Because I still want to try the gold kind. Ezra laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of hope. I think we can arrange that, sweetheart. He looked at Serafina, his green eyes bright with possibility. What do you say? Ready to try real life? Fair warning, it involved a lot of pancakes, bedtime stories, and a 7-year-old who asks approximately 1,000 questions per day. Serafina wiped her tears and smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in years. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. As they walked toward Ezra's car together, Kira slipped her small hand into Serafina's, and for the first time in her life, Serafina understood what home felt like. It wasn't a penthouse with city views. It was wherever these two people were. I'm literally crying happy tears right now. After everything they've been through, they found their way back to each other. But this isn't quite the end yet. We still need to see how their new life together unfolds. Are you as emotional as I am right now? Let me know in the comments how this resolution made you feel. 6 months later, Serafina woke up to the sound of laughter drifting through the windows of the small house she'd bought in Riverside District. Not as an investment, but as a home. Real laughter, the kind that came from pancake batter fights and tickle wars, and the pure joy of a 7-year-old who discovered that Saturday mornings were made for staying in pajamas until noon. She padded downstairs in her bare feet, following the scent of coffee and something that smelled suspiciously like burnt bacon. In the kitchen, she found Ezra standing at the stove with a dish towel thrown over his shoulder, his hair mussed from sleep, looking more handsome than any man had a right to look while scraping charcoal off breakfast meat. Need help? She asked, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Only if you know how to resurrect bacon, he said, leaning back into her embrace. Kira distracted me with a very important question about whether unicorns prefer pancakes or waffles. Pancakes, obviously, Kira announced from her perch at the kitchen table, where she was carefully arranging plastic flowers in a mason jar. Waffles have too many holes. The magic would fall out. Serafina laughed, still amazed by how easily this had become her life. How naturally she'd slipped into the rhythm of school pickups and bedtime stories, of grocery shopping and homework help, of being part of something bigger and more important than herself. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been awkward moments, difficult conversations, and more than a few nights when Serafina had wondered if she was fooling herself about being capable of this kind of love. But Ezra had been patient, and Kira had been forgiving, and somehow they'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of that first disastrous encounter. I have news, Serafina said, settling in her chair at the table. The same table where they'd shared hundreds of meals, where Kira did her homework while Serafina helped with math problems, where they planned weekend adventures and discussed everything from favorite colors to the meaning of life. Good news or bad news? Ezra asked, sliding a plate of slightly burnt but perfectly edible bacon in front of her. Good news. Great news, actually. Serafina pulled out her phone and showed them a news article. Miranda was sentenced yesterday. 15 years in federal prison. Ezra whistled low. 15 years. That's justice, Serafina said firmly. For everyone she hurt, everyone she manipulated, everyone whose life she destroyed for her own gain. The trial had been a media sensation, exposing decades of corruption that had reached into every corner of the city's power structure. Serafina had testified, laying bare her own complicity in Miranda's schemes, accepting responsibility for the pain caused by her willful blindness. It had been humiliating and necessary, and ultimately liberating. "Does this mean the bad lady can't hurt people anymore?" Kira asked, looking up from her flower arrangement. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart," Ezra said, ruffling her hair. "She can't hurt anyone anymore." Kira nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Good, because I have something important to tell you both." She climbed down from her chair and disappeared into the living room, returning with a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. It was clearly meant to be the three of them, stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a crooked chimney and flowers that were taller than the windows. "I drew our family," she announced proudly, "for the art show at school next week." Serafina felt her throat tighten with emotion. Our family. Such simple words, but they meant everything. "It's beautiful," she managed to say. "But Kira, you know I'm not. I mean, your dad and I aren't." She trailed off, realizing she didn't know how to finish that sentence. What were they exactly? They lived together, loved together, made decisions together. Ezra had a key to her heart, and she had a key to his life, but they'd never made it official, never put a label on what they'd built. "Aren't what?" Kira asked with the kind of innocent directness that cut straight to the heart of things. Serafina looked at Ezra, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. They'd been so focused on healing, on building trust, on creating a stable life for Kira, but they'd never talked about the future in concrete terms. "We're not married," Ezra said gently. "Serafina isn't technically your stepmother. But she loves us," Kira said with the absolute certainty of a child who'd never doubted it. "And we love her. And she lives here and makes pancakes with us, and reads me stories, and helps with my homework. That sounds like family to me." Out of the mouths of babes. Serafina felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this little girl who'd taught her what unconditional love looked like, who'd accepted her into their lives with the kind of grace that adults spent lifetimes trying to learn. "You're right," she said softly. "That does sound like family. The best kind of family," Ezra added, reaching across the table to take her hand. "The kind you choose." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows, the smell of coffee and slightly burnt bacon filling the air. It was such an ordinary moment, and yet Serafina knew she'd remember it forever, the moment she finally understood that she was exactly where she belonged. "I have an idea," she said suddenly. "What if we made it official?" Ezra's eyebrows rose. "Official how?" "Well," Serafina said, her heart hammering with nervous excitement, "I was thinking we could have a wedding. Nothing fancy, just us and the people we love. Maybe in Mrs. Chen's garden behind a bakery." "Are you proposing to me?" Ezra asked, his eyes dancing with amusement and something deeper. "I think I am," Serafina said, laughing at her own boldness. "Is that okay? I know it's supposed to be the other way around, but I've never been very good at following rules." "Can I be the flower girl?" Kira interrupted, bouncing in her chair with excitement. "Please. I promise I won't drop the petals." "You could be whatever you want to be," Serafina said, then looked back at Ezra. "So, what do you say? Want to make this crazy, beautiful, imperfect thing we've built official?" Ezra stood up and walked around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Serafina Blackwood," he said solemnly, "you are the most stubborn, generous, complicated woman I've ever met. You turned my world upside down, broke my heart, put it back together, and somehow convinced me that fairy tales can come true in the most unexpected ways." "Is that a yes?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a yes to everything," he said, and kissed her while Kira cheered and clapped and declared that this was the best Saturday morning ever. Later that evening, after Kira had been tucked into bed with promises that they'd start planning the wedding tomorrow, Serafina and Ezra sat on the front porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you ever miss it?" Ezra asked quietly. "The penthouse, the power, the life you had before?" Serafina considered the question seriously. Did she miss the luxury? Sometimes. Did she miss the sense of control that came with unlimited resources? Occasionally. Did she miss the isolation, the constant calculation, the cold emptiness of a life built on other people's pain? Not for a single second. I miss the good parts, she said honestly. I miss being able to solve problems with money, being able to help people without worrying about the cost. But I don't miss being alone. I don't miss being afraid of everyone's motives. And I definitely don't miss being the kind of person who could hurt a child because I was too scared to trust my own heart. You're not that person anymore, Ezra said, squeezing her hand. No, Serafina agreed. I'm not. I'm someone's almost wife, and someone's almost stepmother, and someone who burns bacon and helps with second-grade math homework, and reads bedtime stories about brave princesses who save themselves. Don't forget someone who's revolutionizing affordable housing in the city, Ezra added with a smile. The Blackwood Foundation has built more low-income housing in 6 months than the city managed in the previous 5 years. Serafina smiled, thinking about the construction crews working on projects across the city, projects that would give families like Ezra and Kira safe, affordable places to call home. It was good work, important work, the kind of legacy she actually wanted to leave behind. I love you, she said suddenly, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. I love you too, Ezra replied. Both of you, my girls. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Serafina thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with 3 words, she's with me, spoken by a father protecting his daughter. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a family built on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than convenience, on a radical idea that people could change, could grow, could become better than they'd ever imagined possible. Tomorrow, they'd start planning a wedding. Next week, Kira will display her family drawing at the school art show. Next month, they'd break ground on another affordable housing project. Next year, who knew what adventures awaited them? But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, together, under the stars, in a small house in Riverside District where love lived in every corner and magic happened every single day. And if that wasn't a happy ending, Serafina didn't know what was. And there we have it, beautiful souls. From a chance encounter at a charity gala to a family built on love, trust, and second chances. Serafina found her real self. Ezra found his faith and love again. And Kira got the family she always deserved. I'm so grateful you took this journey with me. It's been absolutely magical. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which moment made you cry happy tears. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with the simplest words, she's with me.